Alrighty, gang. August 21st, and welcome. We're right in the heart of it. So we're back today. We've got Paul and myself with us today, and it's a good day for both of us to be here, as we're going to talk a little bit about form-based running, and a subject that has come up with newer athletes pretty frequently. You guys that have been with us for the whole of the season have heard Paul and I talk about MFP, minimum form pace, which is a coined term that we created as an educational concept towards the start of this season. And for you guys that have been here over the course of the whole season, have become relatively familiar with it. But by request, we're going to go back through a little bit of it again. And as we've sort of used this concept as we've gone through the season, as with anything new, you think about something, you apply in many ways, you're testing on the live audience in a thoughtful way, a concept that we think will help, and you see things emerge over the course of the season as you're going through. So it's really timely to revisit MFP, but with particular focus today around how to execute form-based running when you're aiming to run easy. And that's a common challenge. How many athletes that we have, lower end running athletes, that will say to us, you tell me to go for an easy run, but as soon as I start running, my heart rate explodes. I can't sustain an easy form-based run for very long at all. So we want to focus on that today. So really the three things that we're going to go through is re-establish or establish what minimum form pace is, and the elements of good form through. Dissect a little bit of the difference between athletes that are very top level athletes, very good runners that can do minimum form pace all day, which is your go all day pace, as some of our professionals and better amateurs can do, and then mix that up with the relationship of minimum form pace for a less able to medium base level runner and below. Very, very common for most amateur athletes. And then we want to dissect and get into actually easy running and how to execute easy running. So we're going to do this in a very conversational way and chat through. It should take 15 or 20 minutes at the most. And then we'll dive into questions for you guys that are here live today. So let's talk about MFP as a concept. I guess first I'll define it again. It's your minimum form pace. That's what we refer to. And the first time we applied this was, I think, on our pros in Hawaii this year, that we really introduced the concept, wasn't it? And we did it as an important element for those guys, and then realizing that it really extended to you guys as well as a concept. And we want to dissect the word first. So minimum form pace, which for those guys was the slowest pace that they can run, with all of the elements that we establish of good running form being present in their running. So that's it. For the wider audience, it's that, or as many elements of good running form as you can maintain. So why don't we talk about minimum form pace first? And I'll let you lead this to start, Paul. In your words, why we came up with this, and then let's redefine it again.
Well, we did start coining a phrase for it and trying to define it back at the start of the year. But over the last few years, and I mean, the reality is that the vast majority of our athletes, or certainly the majority of our athletes, don't have a problem running slowly towards the end of an Ironman marathon. So when we had as people were evolving their run, it became readily apparent that if you sent people out for a long, slow run, all they were doing is practicing the thing that they didn't really want to do at the end of an Ironman, and that's run slowly and part of the contribution for running slowly, aside from mechanical fatigue and the rest of it, was that elements of good running form were no longer present. So as this evolved, we had runners who, they came to camps and discovered elements of good running form that they could introduce into their natural run, and maybe eliminate some of the inefficiencies. people would get to a place where it's like they go out for the easy run, but really focus on good running form and come back and go, I ran faster than I really wanted to, but it felt great. And that was because they had run well. And this is a key concept that sort of came to this place of MFP running, that the primary awareness that people need to have is to be able to run as well as they can, as often as they can, for as long as they can. And then a few people get to add as hard as they can based on event, duration. So that's where the MFP running thing came from, and that's where it's going. And, people fall into what? We have our pros and our good amateur runners who race pace is MFP plus an amount of physical effort and exertion. We have people who are teetering on the border of MFP would be, an ideal thing to maintain over the duration of an event. If they ran an entire half marathon or marathon at MFP pace, it would probably be a PR. And then we have people who aspire to run at MFP, and that might be trying to combine as many elements of good running form as often as possible, but they're still not at a place where they can put everything together, or to run at MFP as often as possible and have a way of managing what that does to their physical stress.
And I think that you got to be, it's good to know who you are as an athlete, because that's going to become the management tool, the mindset of the way that you approach your training and then certainly your racing as well. But I think when we come, let's go back a level as well, and let's come to good running form, because we're not talking about little tiny minutiae of good running form. We're not reconstructing running form here, are we? We're not talking about foot plant or whether your hand is doing this or whether it's doing this or doing this. We're not talking about the tiny details. If you think about video analysis and going and getting lasers and force plate treadmills and everything else that's not really worthwhile you spending your money on, we're talking about real building blocks of good form. So let's sort of establish what the tenets of good form are that we're talking about here. It's really three main things, eh?
Yeah, 3
to 4.
Yeah, 3 to 4 main things. Posture, which is for everything that we do. So, that's the body structure, the basic structure that you're going to operate from. So good posture and, standing tall, leaning forward from basically the point of contact with the ground. So gravity does a bit of work for you. And those are the simple key elements of good posture. And then we have foot speed, which the two running dynamic things that we have, if you want to call them the ends of range, the high cadence and the low cadence option, if you like, foot speed, the ability to turn the feet over with short contact time with the foot on the ground is a key element, because if that declines, then impact increases dramatically, and also muscle loading increases dramatically if your foot is on the ground for a long time and you sink down into that foot. And then the other element of the good running form is posterior activation, the ability to actually push off the back foot, off the big toe generally, to propel you along the course. If you're gifted with a springy run, that is a wonderful thing to have. But bouncing up and down doesn't get you that much closer to the finish line by itself. You need something to propel you forward. And after about 400 meters of running fast, quad impact and the drive that you get off the front foot becomes a diminishing part of the propulsion, because it can't be sustained over longer distances. So that being able to talk to the back half of the body, the things that are behind your center line, which the brain is not that great at, is a really important factor. So within the foot speed, posterior activation, and good posture, there's some details and some linking parts of, how do we get the foot speed? How do we get the posterior activation? Well, one of the key things is that the detail, if you like, of what your arms are doing. the body is really, really good at communicating with the hands. So if you move the hands more quickly, because we have that coordination thing between hands and feet, the feet will move more quickly. If you drive the arm back in a positive way, it tends to connect with driving that leg back in a positive way. So I guess if you wanted a fourth element, it would be the arm carriage and its connection with what your feet are doing.
And that was the fourth element I was referring to, as much that linking coordination of it all, and also preventing it from doing what you don't want to do, with so many athletes running with their arms well out in front of them, which of course is going to have a disruptive effect that we won't get into today, but a disruptive, decelerating type effect more fluidly. So with those elements, let's sort of go through and imagine that all of those elements are present for a professional or a very good runner, a very good amateur runner. When all of those elements are present, they have good posture, their shoulders are in front of hips because they're leaning forward from the point of contact a little bit, their arms are tidy, driving behind, they have good leg speed, a little bit of drive in the actual leg propulsive phase, they're running, their easiest pace that they're going to be running is probably somewhere between, we always talk about sort of that 650 to 8.25 type range, 815, 820. And after that, I mean, that's the range, So you guys can understand whether you're in that top category, that if you can run all day, really easy, very easy in that range, there's a good chance that your MFP is there and that you're in that window,
Oh, for sure. And our springiest pro runners might be able to run, or our springiest amateur runners as well, might be able to run around 7 minutes or just under and just be floating along. But then we have some of our professionals who are more relentless efficiency type runners whose MFP rate, pace is somewhere in the 720 to 730 range. And then, but because of the effect of gravity, once you get sort of around to the 820 range, it's very difficult to combine leg speed, posterior activation, good posture, and run slower than that with all those elements combined. But the critical factor there is that what you want to be doing, if you're not one of those people who can run at that pace freely and manage the stress, but you're right at that border, you've got to be thinking of, how can I run that way as well as I can, as often as I can, for as long as I can, and what am I going to do to manage it? If you're behind that place where 820 would be a dream pace, then what we've got to do is we've got to use the aspiration, the idea of that we're going to try and develop our run pace towards being able to run at that pace. But realistically, over the course of an event, the only time you might be running at that pace is when the terrain gives you the benefit of gravity, for instance. So you get on a 1 or 2% downhill and there it is, the 820 running pace happens. And other times you're going to be trying to combine as many elements of good running form as you can to generate whatever pace that is. And that might be 920 pace, it might be 950 pace, whatever that is.
And then, of course, the management cue between that in training and in racing is, of course, purposeful walking. And that's a highly accepted. And this strikes at the heart of the reason why we always laugh when an athlete says or provides the coach the advice. You sometimes hear coaches reading advice: just never stop running in an Ironman. And to us, it doesn't make any sense at all, because strategic, purposeful walking to reset good form and to lower physical stress, lower your heart rate, lower your breathing, and keep good momentum forward is a really good tool to use in training, but then also in racing as well, of course. So that's the quick and dirty on MFP. You sort of have three categories. You're going all day, but even with our pros, Paul talked about as well as you can, as often as you can, with great running form. But the professional athletes, the very top athletes, the guys that are running 111 off the bike, the women that are running 117, 118, 119 off the bike, we don't want them running at that pace for every one of their runs. There are opportunities and times where we want them running easier than that. And that's really the focus of today, because at each one of our 3 categories, whether you can go all day at MFP pace if you're asked, or it's right on that bubble and it's an aspiration to be able to maintain MFP throughout the course of a half Ironman or an Ironman, or it is purely aspirational and you're going to be mixing as many elements of good form as possible and probably balancing it with purposeful walking. In all cases, you're going to want to have easier runs than that. So let's go through and talk about person 1, the pro or very good runner who can do MFP all day, the on the bubble mix of MFP, aspirational race pace, and then the person that just simply, unless gravity is on their side, they're not going to have all of the elements of good form. They're not going to be running 8:20 pace or faster. So, PJ, that is not you as much as you are pointing to that. But all 3 categories, we're all playing the same game. We're trying to get, from joking aside, we're trying to get to A to B as fast as we can. So it's important. It's not, oh, I'm better and you're not as good and you're the worst. This is problem solving for each group. And so let's talk about easy running for each group. And as we're going to find out, for one group, there isn't easy running. There just simply isn't easy running. So let's start at the top end, at least for current ability type say, take at the pros. And how do they approach the very good runners? How do they approach easy running?
Well, interestingly, they don't get a lot of easy running, but there will be 2 general key sessions that people will get where we want to keep the overall effort down. And like everything, whether it's swim, bike, or run, when you get a session that's form-based recovery with no exercise prescription to muddy up the waters or to distract you from doing that activity well, then you get to go and focus on form and recovery. So to prevent Sam Appleton from just doing all his easy, read form-based recovery runs at 6:50 pace, let's introduce that idea of, if you're going to run slower than MFP and you're that runner whose race pace is MFP plus effort, what you have to be able to do is consciously subtract an element of good running form and focus on another one. So that might be doing a little bit of lower cadence bounding up a steepish grade, and the heart rate might come up, but it's very good for posterior activation. It might be doing that bounding up onto a park bench and then just trotting along and turning around and coming back and doing it again a few times, or a series of park benches. The overall running pace will drop down quite quickly. Getting on one of those controllable gradients downhill where it would be great to just let it fly, and a springy runner like Sam would just be floating across, but he can take out the push off the back, work on really quick leg turnover where he can control the leg turnover with arm speed without gravity having it run away on him and having to slow down and then start again. So he can work on leg speed in that environment. Overall running pace will stay down. So on those form-based runs, if you are running in just normal running environments and looking for opportunities to work on the ends of range of form of running leg speed and posterior activation, if you start introducing those in there in a technique, in a form-based way, overall running pace will come down. So, and then when you're running freely between those activation parts of it, consciously subtract an element of good running form. Don't just run poorly. And then the next element that we have is, if someone's going for a long run, an endurance run, and we don't want someone running at 6:50 or 7:20 pace for the whole thing, is get off road and get it as rough as possible. So that adds in a whole bunch of things. The off-road running with rough terrain is fantastic for resilience of ankles and knees and so on, and connective tissue. It's really, really good for working out your protective running asymmetry. So often people will have an uneven stride length based on a dominant leg, which is, and you'll hear running, and if you go out and run yourself and you hear slap tap, slap tap, slap tap, and you think, oh, I wonder if that's the camber of the road. You go run on the other side of the road and it's the same thing, slap tap, slap tap. That's often a running asymmetry based on dominant leg, and often the right leg will hit the ground if you're right-legged, slap, because it's used to pushing off with the quad, and the other one goes tap and gives a little push. So you can start playing around with that off-road, because the varied nature of the terrain really, you know, it's a way of evening out, because both legs have got to do more work and you don't get to go into that protective mode. So you get to steep pieces of terrain where there is no running option, so pace comes down. You get to steep pieces of terrain where you don't actually get to run down fast, because it's about coordination and foot-eye coordination and so on. And overall, we have very good runners who go out and run in the mountain bike trails in Boulder or up behind the town in Girona at the moment, and they come back and their running pace might be 9:10. But they've had a really good run, because when you pull apart the graph of what they did, you can see little bits of work where the terrain made you work uphill, places where the pace was taken out because you simply couldn't run faster. That's a way that really good runners can manage overall running pace and stress without running too fast too often.
And of course it's on soft surface, which is less of a net effect for the next day, and it's a certain sense of freedom as well. It unshackles them from the obsession of chasing a pace, which so often happens despite our best intentions of validation. So I'm getting it easy today. I'm going to let Paul roll with it, but let's go to the middle group then. So we have the middle group who can sustain MFP, but obviously comes at a cost. It's MFP is very closely aligned with probably half Ironman or Ironman race pace, depending on athlete. And it's a similar kettle of fish in many ways, isn't it? I mean, this one's going to be very quick. It's a similar mindset to the elite athlete, maybe with a little bit more addition of purposeful walking.
For sure, because you get to some of those steeper pieces where you can actually, you know, might be at 8, 9, 10% grade, where you have to place your feet and there's a bit of bounding and a bit of stepping up and so on. Heart rate will come up. So because the fitness capacity isn't the same as our professional athletes or some of our very elite amateur athletes, then to manage that, you get to go into that really strong walking where you get to pivot off that front foot placement, you know, which is really good for actually giving the quad a little stretch out when it's often never fully extended and under load like that, where you get to really think about that, the connection of the driving the arm back and the leg, because when you're walking, it's happening more slowly. So that will creep in for that group of runners to manage the overall stress. But most of the rest of it will be pretty much the same. And it doesn't matter on those, especially on those endurance runs, if you've done a bit of that activation and there's a bit of work in there, if you're one of those people who is hovering on that aspiration of MFP running, a little bit in one of those endurance runs, it doesn't matter when you've done that, just to let the MFP pace flow a little bit. But don't go on with it for too long, because if you are teetering on that border of it's MFP pace plus a tiny bit of effort, or MFP pace is just that far away from your current race pace, you don't want to do that too often, or all of a sudden endurance day becomes, you know,
race pace
day.
And the one thing I'll say on both of the categories, just to add, as Paul mentioned earlier, with intent, the extraction of an element of good running form. Of course, that's not suddenly running with poor posture, which was one of the building blocks. It's not leaning back and drawing back. It's probably taking a little bit of the arm speed out, a little bit of the arm drive, but mostly it's really that leg drive, that toe off, keeping nice light running. For the most part, as a baseline, when you're running on a flat road, you would bring in toe drive when you're running uphill, as Paul mentioned, and you might do a bit more of a bounding run, lengthen out and slow leg speed, so you can actually really work on that drive. But on the flats, making sure that a good intent, full of intent extraction of running form isn't suddenly just going boom and looking at your feet and slouching over the run. We always want that central, even if you're running uphill, downhill, swimming, biking, posture is the centerpiece, the anchor that everything else hangs around in many ways. So the last thing that we come to then is the runner that has a pure aspiration of hitting, of ever hitting all of the elements of good running form, to be frank, and certainly not touching on pure MFP with somewhere between 650 and 820 pace. In all likelihood, that sort of range we're talking about, much if ever in racing. So the common complaint with these folks is, as soon as I go up on an easy run, I can't control my heart rate. That's the and I'm sure many of us here have felt that. I try and go out easy, and boom, as soon as I start running, my heart rate's through the roof. So what do we do there? What do we do with these athletes if they want to go out on an easy run? And the truth is, there aren't any easy runs. There might be some inclusion of some walks and some hiking, but we may extract easy running from the program globally.
But there is where there will be more of the focus on recovering from the stresses that build up with the few paces, the 10 to 20 paces of recovery walk into strong walk and so on. But there's going to be an element in those where in those endurance runs and those form-based runs where it's purely going to be about on those, I mean, I've got a couple of athletes in my head whose only opportunity to run close to MFP is on that slight downhill. But what they do to keep the stress down on that downhill, instead of trying to put all the elements of good running together, is still do the same thing. Let's lean forward a little bit, let gravity do its work, and just move the arms as fast as we can freely and see if the leg speed will come up. Because one of the things that those people who aspire to run with MFP almost invariably need to do is increase leg speed and decrease foot contact time as a consequence. When they get to a slight uphill, it might be a combination of strong walking and just a few bounding steps, and then back into the strong walk again to manage the pace. Because that bounding, when you propel yourself off the ground, it's one of the key elements across all three categories, is why running has the cost it does, because you need to accelerate yourself off the ground and then propel yourself forward while you're off the ground. Walking, by definition, has one foot on the ground, so you don't have that vertical acceleration. So those people might do a little bit of bounding on a hill, but it might only be 4 or 5 paces. They also might go down to the local park and do some really valuable stuff of just doing circuits of the park, bounding up onto a bench, stepping down a few running paces into a strong walk, bounding up on a bench. Now, that doesn't sound like that's a run, but it's one of the best things that someone who aspires to get closer and closer to MFP running by combining as many aspects of MFP as often as they can for as long as they can. And that's how a really, really good way of having that person progress.
So the final thing I'll say is 2 small things. It's a message to you guys as Purple Patch athletes. The first is some of this, a small part, was a reaction to me seeing, us seeing, Paul and I seeing so many videos out there promoting just a single form, taking let's take a wonderful runner, Jan Frodeno or Mirinda Carfrae, and trying to have every athlete aspire to running like that. It's just absolutely unsustainable. And so for us, our job is to dissect the different types of athletes that we have and try and give each of those categories the tools and the mindset of how to improve. There's absolutely no value with someone that's going to spend a considerable time walking, that has the pure aspiration to ever hit 8.5-minute mile pace on a flat road, unless it's downhill, trying to look at one of those runners and saying, run like them. And unfortunately, that's the influence of so much of the literature, so much of the coaching that we see, and that's just not useful. It's useful for some, it's not useful for most. And then the second thing that I think is really important is, if you are an athlete where you look at your run, or the reality is that your run is the weakest of your 3 disciplines. It's not okay just to pull the parachute and say, I'm a bad runner. Because the key thing is everyone can improve. This is a skill, and some people are gifted with very springy, explosive runs, carrying very little body composition. And you look at them and we all say, how in the world do they do that? But for all of us, if you actually really think your way through and you practice and you start to apply this mindset, you start to understand who you are as an athlete, and you do it consistently, you can improve. And so I want to ensure that we leave today with the mindset of you have something to work on, and you have the understanding and the baseline understanding of what this means in your program, so that when you see MFP, you think, what does that mean for me? How am I going to approach it? And how am I going to choose the terrain, the course, or whatever it might be, to actually help myself become a better runner? Not today, it won't be a flip of the lid and be a better runner today, but by this time next year, I don't even recognize the athlete that I was today in running. And it happens all the time, and we can improve. So if running is your weakness, that doesn't mean it has to stay your weakness. You really can improve. So aspirational is a good word. We should be aspirational to ourselves and improve ourselves. So with that, anything else?
It's just the last thing really, and it's with everything in training, the reason that you go out and you think about this and you work on it and so on to be better at what you do. For start off, you'll enjoy it more if you're better at it. But the reason that you do that and you focus on the form and the posterior activation and the leg speed and so on is so you don't have to think about it so much on race day. When you're thinking about pace management and distribution of work over the course, those are the things you want to be focused on race day. You don't want to have to think about how to do a thing. It's just when you're going to do it and how often you're going to do it, and whether it's a good idea for that particular piece of the course. So if you have that mindfulness while you're training of how you're going to do that on race day, and you start shuffling up a hill and you go, well, heart rate's up and pace is actually down. Wait a minute, I shouldn't be shuffling here. Let's do the strong walk. Or you're running down the hill and you decide to stride out, and it's like a few steps later, your legs are telling you that's not a clever idea. So it's like, wait a minute, I'm going to take some of that leg speed, and that's how I'm going to run downhill with best return on investment. So whatever you do in training, the working on the being a better technician at everything that you do, you've got to be able to take that and apply the lessons on race day. And that's when you get what we tend to call return on investment. The best return on investment for your physical contribution on the day will be if you do everything as well as you can, as often as you can, for as long as you can.
I will say to close out that when we first introduced this to the pro team, we had the whole pro team there in Hawaii, and we introduced it as a concept. And you know, many of these men and women are very, very good runners, and we introduced a brand new concept. And I knew that we were just opening ourselves up for absolute ridicule. It's like trying to reinvent the wheel. And for the rest of that camp, every time we mentioned MFP, all the guys, ooh, MFP, MFP. And then slowly, like, maybe there's something to this. And now it's a part of our dialogue, and they understand what we want. And that's part of coaching, is the athlete understanding the intent and bought into it. And they understand and they lock into rhythm, and it's a part of our common everyday language now. And now that they are getting ready for World Championships and other key races at the end of the year, their recovery between the key intervals isn't easy. We just type MFP and they know that is coming back. And that means that throughout the whole of a session, 8 by 1 kilometer, whatever it might be, all of that, including running, is done with good form, all elements of, at that pro athlete level. And that's a really, really important thing at the race specific time of the year. We're not practicing good form, which of course, part of their puzzle, even though they're putting effort behind that form, hard effort quite often, is part of this game is form under fatigue. And can you actually retain form under fatigue? And if we train them to be able to do that no matter what, it's more likely to show up on race day, and that's when they get judged, and so do Paul and I. So we shall see. So I hope that helps. You might need to go and watch that again. You might need to watch this a few times. It's an important. I said 20 minutes, but it's Paul and I talking together. So that's 20 and 20. That's 40 minutes. So I'm spot on my timing because we double up when we both take the microphone. But yeah, it's important. Like I think this is for your form-based running, whether you're an easier or a slower runner to a faster runner. This is important listening here. So you guys that are live, I maybe even go and rewatch it. Okay, so we can either answer questions on MFP and running, or we can dovetail into any questions. And who do you want to start with today? Should we start with Pamplemousse?
Pamplemousse.
Pamplemousse in Boise, Idaho, cowboy country now. Look at him. Let's hear his accent. We haven't heard it for a while.
Giddy up.
Giddy up.
Yeah, so, I mean, like, honestly, I haven't been doing a ton of running since I've been here. I've just mostly been, like, mountain biking because there's all kinds of trails. But I've started running again. But, like, I prefer to just go out and run on trails. And from my house, like, I found a great trail. And it seems, I mean, it goes up about, in the, like, 3.5 to 4 miles, it goes up about 900 feet. And then it levels off and comes around a ridge and then a big downhill. But when I get to the bottom of the hill and I get back out onto the road, I really notice that, like, I'm actually driving off my toes. Now, is that a product of just starting uphill and running uphill? And like, I mean, you guys have seen me run, but, like, I know my heart rate, whether I'm wearing my heart rate monitor or not, I know my heart rate is, like, pretty high going up the hill, but then I feel it level off. It gets back into that zone 2, zone 3 pace when I'm just running along the ridge. And then when I go downhill, it tends to go back up. Should I spend more time on level ground, or do you think it's okay to just kind of do that 8-mile loop when I have, like, you know, an hour to an hour and a half run?
Sounds like a fantastic environment for working on form, because if the gradients aren't too steep, you can add in some end of range type running. You know, you can add in some foot speed and you can add in some posterior activation. It sounds like a fantastic environment to train in, but it's a bit like, you know, you say you've got a mountain bike there, and I mean, I encourage you to go ride that thing all the time. It teaches you great balance, great bike handling, very good pedaling dynamics for traction and so on. But every now and then you need to go to a more race-specific environment and apply your fitness and the stuff that you're doing in an event-specific way. And I guess if you take the end result of that, you know, it's why motor pacing still works. You get behind a car, and even though the physiology as far as power and effort and so on are no different, the fact that you're going really fast helps that whole sense of speed. So you want to every now and then, and if you've got trails, if you've got soft surface where you can do your efforts and so on for the majority of the time, by all means do that. If they're a little bit more benign, if you like, and, you know, less variation. So I don't mind if you do, well, no one really minds if you do all of your running on soft surface, as long as you have the opportunity to build speed. And, you know, you can do those feel-good things too. You know, find a 1% grade where you just feel fantastic running and you're running fast. It'll make you feel good. But, yeah, not everything in that sort of off-road environment, because you want to have a little bit of that sense of how it feels to run fast at your, you know, capacity.
Yeah, and as far as the biking stuff goes, I mountain bike like 3 days a week, and then on Saturday or Sunday, I've been cycling with a couple of the clubs out here. So we'll go hit like a 50 to 80 mile road ride on those days.
It sounds like it's a nice place to retire to, PJ. So nice. Not working anymore. Super.
Working on it.
So let's go to Boulder. Let's go to Super Dave, because he, the boys have been doing their intervals. The pro boys have been doing their intervals around Boulder Reservoir and some of that, just that soft surface and rolling terrain. So I I thought about that. We won't necessarily send them to the track too often. They went on Saturday, but we do a lot of their key intervals on soft surface. So, so as we're talking boulder, why don't we see how Super Dave's doing? Any questions?
So I like you use the word intent, because yesterday's run is the coach's ability to understand my intent of the run versus your prescription of the run. And trust me, I had really well intentions, but the run didn't go. I mean, you had me chasing up left-hand canyon with a bike. You had me run on a hill, and Sunday I paid the price for it. So if you have the, yes, I'm a whiner, Paul, thank you. If you have the moment where, you know, you had me do 30, 20, 15, 10 in increasing paces, do I start as slow as, you know, 15-minute mile so I can do the progressions, or do I intend well and maybe do some MFP, do I chalk up the workout, or do I, like in swimming, adjust my paces to make the last one strong, or do I just at that point use time on my legs?
Well, you come into it a little loaded because of the day before, so it's a bit cruel of me. And actually, even in honesty, prescription maybe not best aligned with your needs, because so the first thing I say is perception and reality on resources are all different. So let me go top end runner first, and I'll answer it with you. Top end runner, if they're equipped, we've been able to run really easy and let the run come to them. And it's very rare that a runner starts a run like that too easy. I'd much rather them go easy, build in, and finish better, even if the delta of paces is not particularly strong. So we're not looking for easy to max on that run. We're just generally looking for a building effort, which is really the theme. But if your legs are really fried, there's no point in doing a whole bunch of MFP running and declining. So it's really whatever you need to do to ensure that the last third of that run or the last piece of that run is your best running with whatever section it is, 15 minutes at the end. You're spending the most of that time running with good form at the best pace you can have. And so on the front side, you still want to sprinkle in some MFP. You do, Dave, but you want to do it with more consistent, purposeful walking, and that's the way to really bring your effort down, as it were. What you don't want to do is just be chugging along, running at 15-minute miles when in fact that's purposeful walking pace. If that makes sense. For the most part,
okay.
Give or take, 15-minute mile pace is walking pace.
And graciously, you gave me an optional rest day today, so I appreciate that.
It's very kind of me. So, good stuff. We had Francisco Castillo on here. So, are we really gonna have to? All right, we will. Steve, do you have any questions?
I think I know the answer, but I think it's valuable, especially when you're competing in different sort of environments or training in different environments, to talk about the effect of heat or extreme heat on MFP.
Well, but there was a study that I saw. Who emailed that to me? It was probably you, Steve, but it wasn't you. Someone just emailed me a thing about heat that I saw, which was actually about training in heat and the negative effect of finding heat to training, which many of our athletes have found out before. But the summary of it all was the effects of training in high heat in that sort of middle of the day, seeking out heat, and what that does for recuperation on the back end. So we always talk about, if possible, going to do your running at the coolest part of the day. So before I answer it, it's just that's really what we're looking for. Outside of short runs off the bike, whatever it might be, a key session wants to be done at the coolest part of the day, which at this time of the year, if you're living in the swamp of Florida or the desert of Arizona, becomes really challenging to find any of that. In fact, some of the ways to navigate around it is to put athletes onto the treadmill. When you are in high heat, there is an additional layer of physiological stress that that's going to stunt the ability to run with all elements of good form for some people without your heart rate just becoming uncontrollable. And so it's another factor that needs to be managed. And that probably means more walk breaks with purposeful walking so that the stress of the day doesn't become too high.
I mean, you know, with your situation, you know, down in the armpit there, that we went through a place where running paces had got really good and manageable, and then as it got hotter and hotter, it was harder and harder to make those paces because the heart rate related heat response. And I mean, that's where heart rate can be a good guide to the level of stress the body's under and so on. Just because, you know, say the number was 200 watts on the bike or 730 running or whatever it is, and on a cool day when you trained in the cool, it generated 155 beat, you know, heart rate. If 190 watts or 745 generates the same heart rate, you have to accept that that is one of those things. You don't get to just go, I'm going to go at the same pace and then see this, and it will be a rapid acceleration of heart rate until you dig yourself a hole that's very difficult to get out of or hurt yourself. You can't just keep on piling that on. You've got to have an idea of overall physical stress, not just from the work you're doing, but also the heat management. And I mean, part of the stress the body has when you're working, even on a cool day, is managing the heat that's produced from the work. And if you don't have a way of getting rid of that, then stress gets high. It's a reality, you know, it's why you can't be, you know, there's so many things with the information that's available, you know, to process by running pace, you know, all the metrics that are available on your bicycle. And the bottom line is you've still got to have a feeling for that. Am I working at the appropriate rate? Yes. Well, the reality is that this is the pace. And you can't chase the pace and ignore the other thing, or you will end up in trouble. And it's probably not going to be, you know, your best outcome on the day. So that's just a reality. So with all that information, like anything else, the information that's available is only useful if you do something with it. If you can do something positive with that information, process it, and do something to manage your race, then it's an asset. If it's a distraction or you don't know what to do with the information, it's a liability. You might as well not have it. Just go back to doing it on perceived effort.
And the liability is if you are unwilling to act on it as well, unlimited, as sort of Paul talks about, unwilling to accept reality of the situation. And if you tested and got your zones in April on a nice cool spring morning, and you're now in August, and you say, yes, but my race pace or my zone 3 pace is X, Y, and Z. If it's set it and forget it on that, you ain't in zone 3 if your heart rate's coming out of your ears and bumping in your ears, that's for sure. So.
And on that note, I was just speaking with someone in Europe this morning that Matt volunteered to do his first Ironman at Ironman Wales, just because it's such an easy course. And we were talking about the recovery on a course that's really hilly, and the same thing applies for a really hot course. If you get to that place where you have either dug yourself a hole by just exceeding your physical limits for a little bit, or you've overheated, be patient. Set yourself a realistic time to recover from it, not just, oh, the stress is gone, I'm going to go again. Give yourself a realistic time to reset the resource and go again, because most of you who are racing are pretty competitive, and it's like, oh, it doesn't hurt as much anymore, or I don't feel like my head's going to explode with the heat, I'm going to go again. Well, trust me, it's a really good way of putting yourself straight back in the place you were trying to avoid. You know, it's a long day out there. Give yourself 5 minutes, give yourself 10 minutes to recover. You know, and 10 minutes is generally a pretty good time. Let's go back to doing it well, keeping the stress down, recover, and then see what's available. But if you do get to that place with heat-related stress, you need to be patient and realistic of how long it takes to get over it and give yourself a chance to recover a little bit.
If the current world champion can do that throughout his race, I reckon we can. Well, we can't because we won't be doing it. So we're much better at preaching than actually doing. Let's go to Adur, who's going to be doing it in the heat. Jordan, any questions? I just loaded up.
Yeah, no, I had a question about long runs. Since I'm getting paranoid I'm not running long enough, you'll probably like think I'm being ridiculous because I'm definitely getting miles in. I just look at my schedule the next couple of weeks, and I know I've got a race coming up, but I think my longest run, you have me doing 90 minutes in Kona coming up, like the week, 2 weeks time. I forget when that is. And I just feels like, should I be running longer? I mean, I've got some like 1 hour in the afternoon, 30 minutes in the morning. So I'm accumulating 90 minutes in the day, but that seems a little short.
And what happens the next day and what happened the day before as far as running? How many of the days like build on top of each other?
Yeah, fair point. And like I said, I'm accumulating miles. Like I've been consistently, for me, holding 30+ mile weeks, which is like on the high side for me. So
I would bank that, and if you're not feeling suppressed by it or you don't have any running injuries, and when you do go and run, you're running well within the prescription, I would say that's a pretty good place to be.
She does have 1 to 2 more bigger runs left before Hawaii, post Santa Cruz, pre-Worlds, because we have 5 weeks.
Yeah, that's true. We've got more time this year. Plus, I mean, Santa Cruz is going to be a long run too, to some extent.
But I mean, I just had the same conversation with someone in the UK today about he's doing Ironman Florida, and when am I going to fit in my bulk of long running? Well, we've got an opportunity this weekend, but he's got a race, British Championships, in 2 weeks' time, so it has to be this weekend or after that race. And he's, because of his running, he's going to get 4 days where he runs relatively long on 3 of them. But it's either got to be this weekend or we have to leave it till after his race. But then we have to get it done pretty soon after his race, because his race is in 11 weeks' time, and then we don't want that bulb of running, which will take a little bit to work through the fatigue. We don't want it to be too close to the race. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure Matt's got your Santa Cruz and your Kona.
Yeah. No, the nice thing is about that Santa Cruz and the World Championships this year is you do actually have, everyone has a chance to actually recuperate a little bit and still do 2 really strong weeks. And in the first of those weeks is the time, so really on the weekend after Santa Cruz, or maybe the Tuesday following, where we do a big double day, where you still have time to do that. And
okay. Well, and it sounds like I might have a training partner for that week, since Emily reached out about coming here. So.
Yeah. No, that's just, I think she's, so she has reached out, has she?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Which is good, because Blanco's going to be gone in China. Sarah's gone, so it'll be nice to have someone around.
There you go. Good stuff. So that will be perfect. Long journeys coming there that time, but you're going to be in a good place. You didn't argue about bike miles, that's for sure. There's plenty of those.
Well, I just came off 160 the last 2 days, so. And that felt good. I had my highest ever power up Yuba Pass. But only I'm 11th on Strava. I failed to break the top 10.
Yeah. Hey, the good thing about your running miles that you've been hitting? It's Jesse Thomas's biggest week ever as a triathlete. So I think once he did 26. It was crazy. God, I needed 2 weeks off.
And that was a race week.
that was race week when he had, exactly. I guess he did 28 or so race week, because he did a couple of miles in the week.
Yeah, he's got a few more miles in his legs though than I have.
He does have, I will give you that. Although you are not lacking miles, that's for sure. Yeah. Auntie Phyllis, do you have any specific questions outside of me but doing Barcelona, or are you all good?
Sorry, doing okay. Yeah, it's funny you're talking about the running, because I remember when you first started, I panicked because I had 2 2-hour runs, and I missed one of them because I was sick going into the Ironman, and I had probably one of my best runs that I've had. So I don't. So now I complain when I see a 2 hour run. Like, oh God, he's got a 2 hour run on there. What's he thinking?
But
So.
you notice there's kind of creeping in a method in the madness of how the runs happen off the rides and how they relate to the run the next day or whatever. And, you know, we're starting to get a reasonably consistent response off the rhythm of running as opposed to the volume by way of individual sessions.
I'm into full-in bike packing, so I've been listening and packing.
Awesome.
Fun stuff.
Happy days, guys. Big banker of a session there. Thanks for joining. Nice to be back on it, and we'll rock and roll.
I'll be out next week, Matt.
Oh, are you here in San Francisco next week?
Yeah, I'll come to the pool on Thursday if it's all right.
What's going with Tuesday?
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday. We're here Tuesday as well, PJ.
I don't get there till Wednesday.
There you go. All right. Okay. Cheers, mate.
Bye.